the thing about it, right, is that a lot of these people, especially like with the way that they think about these sort of issues, like it's not as if they're coming to the into the situation thinking, oh yeah, I just want to murder these black people, right?
Hmm.
But it's sort of like when you follow the line of logic down to its like down to its conclusion, it's they want to like they genuinely do think that police uphold like the norms and order in society, right? But then like they also, in order to maintain that view, have to justify reasons why they disproportionately kill black people and people of color, right? And so it's not so much that they start with the position that black people deserve to be shot, but usually it's they start with the position that the police do no wrong. And so when they kill black people, well, it's not the police's fault. So
What was your first take when you had seen everything that got down? I guess because the biggest question is we are trying to piece together what happened based on some blurry footage, and then I guess this new evidence comes out, which is the police report. Which did you have that? You had that at the time of making your video, right?
yeah, so I was able to look at all the available evidence at the time. So I believe that at the time that the reports I relied on came out, that there had already been some charging documents. I had taken a look at those, and it was in one of the documents where I believe it was stipulated that, for example, that the bottle, the fabled bottle that was
The
thrown at
Molotov, yeah.
Kyle, was I believe that they stipulated that it was actually a plastic bottle in a bag,
Hmm.
based on other
The
evidence that
official
had
police
come out.
report just says plastic bag.
Oh, okay. Oh, just plastic bag.
Yeah,
Okay,
just plastic
wonderful,
bag. Yeah.
amazing. Yeah. So, there's some interesting things like that. But as far as like the analysis, I mean, like a lot of my take was sort of focusing on the police footage because that's probably, or not the police footage, the footage that's been circulating online because that's like if this goes to trial, it's almost certainly going to come up.
Hmm.
Because basically my take when I looked at it first, and in the very abridged sense was if this goes to trial, it's probably a coin flip on which way it's going to go over, right? Which is the answer that a lot of people don't want to hear necessarily, but that's why I went as in depth as I did because I wanted to explain exactly why and what arguments would determine whether or not Charles or Kyle, in my opinion, was going to get charged with certain things, right?
Hmm.
Um, so, for example, it everyone's talking about self defense, right? Like self defense is the term that's circulating with Kyle. Like essentially the question is, was he acting in self-defense
I'll
when
be
he
honest.
shot?
That hadn't entered my mind until that Vosh
Oh,
slash
really?
Destiny debate. Well, of course, because whether or not he was justified in self defending himself was not something that I was really like. I really want to wrap my head around the moral quandary that is the scenario. Like that wasn't something that I was concerned with. What I was concerned with is like,
Okay.
to me, this is more of a bigger picture thing. Like these are the opening salvos and what seems to be quite a violent clash between groups in the United States. And every single time this becomes exacerbated, we have him in this instance, Portland the next day or 2 days later, a shooting from the other direction, and then Trump dousing the whole thing with gasoline. Like the whole that was kind of my perspective on them. And now I've become like everyone else, hyper focused on just this because I didn't know that he would become kind of like the focal point of this entire movement or debate, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and I totally get that. So that's why in my video I made a pretty clear distinction that between what I thought was the moral and legal arguments. Because I do think, like, at least from where I'm coming at this from, after I go through sort of like the legal arguments, the moral argument becomes a lot easier for me, right? Because so it's important to acknowledge a couple things, right, in terms of like how criminal law kind of goes over charges, right? So like basically an abridged version of what I said was that you start with, okay, what could you possibly charge him? Um, and by that meaning, like, if you were to choose specific charges to bring in a case against him, what material elements could be met, right? In this case, I know that under, let me see if I can remember it specifically, it was first degree intentional homicide,
Mm-hmm.
is I think one of the most serious charges that was brought against him. And if I can remember the claim correctly, I mean, I know that, so common law murder is unlawful killing of another with malice aforethought. It's something very similar to that, right? And I talked about it specifically in the video, but essentially when I went through it, just looking at the elements, right? Like disregarding whether or not he acted in self-defense at this point of the analysis. Um, I think it's a pretty likely chance that if this goes to trial, that they'll be able to satisfy the elements pretty handedly. And so what the
But
trial will
can he
turn
not be
on.
tried as a child for all this? Because like, if that is the age,
Oh,
I'm totally on board with that. Because it doesn't matter what he did to me. If you're a child, you're a child. Under the law, you should be treated as one.
yeah, no, I mean, like that's going to depend on what specific Wisconsin law is. I haven't taken child law or juvie law, so that's going to probably change the analysis.
Mm-hmm.
That like that could certainly be possible. But I don't want to comment too much on that because it's outside of what I have studied, and right now I'm strictly coming in just like talking about things that I have learned myself, right?
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, there's a possibility that'll change the analysis, though. Seeing what they charged him, like seeing what the I believe it was the Wisconsin DA charged him with, it doesn't seem like it affects really the charging, right? It might affect the sentencing.
Mm-hmm.
But again, that's just based off the fact that like I know that the Wisconsin DA charged him with, I think it was a first degree intentional homicide, first degree reckless homicide, illegal carry or illegal use of a firearm, and there were several other different charges along those lines, right? So it doesn't seem like it would affect, just based on that information, that it would affect what he is charged with, but rather probably what he would get sentenced for, right? And mind you, like what you charge someone is entirely different from like the charging and trial stages of the criminal process are very distinct and separated from the sentencing process, right? Sentencing is after the jury or the judge has already decided the case on the merits and basically decides based on a totality of factors, which will vary widely from state to state about how to charge a person.
Mm-hmm.
So it probably is different at that point.
So this is going to be such a like. I'm about to cast aspersions here, but what do you think happened before the footage? Like, I know the first shot is heard, and then Kyle appears to shoot someone else directly afterwards, whether or not that person was attacking him or charging at him. But he hears a shot that provokes him, I guess. He then shoots the first victim, and then that's where he like picks up the phone. He's like, I killed someone. And then having seen him shoot someone, more people start to chase after him, right? Was kind of the order of events that I gathered.
That is, so I mean, like, and again, like this will be something which is decided. I don't know if this is something that's been stipulated to or if it's an agreed fact, right? The footage seems to indicate that, at least as analyzed by, I believe it was like USA Today or the New York Times. One of them went through the footage and basically indicated where Kyle and another person had discharged their firearm in that parking lot, right? And the footage seems to pretty clearly show that Kyle had shot the other person. I don't know if they're just going to stipulate to that fact, and acknowledge and try to make an argument of basically a justification argument, right? So
well, when I read the police report, that seemed to be one of the first like instigating cause. They were like, a shot is heard first before, and then Kyle discharges his firearm afterwards. But whether or not that person he was firing at is either someone who was shooting or someone, I don't even think he was armed, right? It was found that he was unarmed afterwards.
I believe so, but I would have to defer to other more accurate accounts. But the thing about this, right? The thing that's going to that does make, like, one of the elements that makes this a little messy is that some of the arguments in Kyle's favor are drawing a distinction between this event and the latter event, or they're saying it depends on how you're construing the facts, right? If you decide that the parking lot instance is distinct and separate from the other one on the street, then you could get a really different kind of analysis, right? So like with the first one, I'm just thinking out. I'm right now. I'm just thinking through it, right? So if you like, I could see a universe where an argument is made where Kyle first shoots someone without provocation, right? And that would not be an instance of self-defense. And then because the other people who then started chasing him because of that event, because then they tried to disarm Kyle, there could be a counter argument to an affirmative defense of self-defense. I talked about this a little bit in my video where, like, when you are, even if you're able to otherwise meet the requirements for a self-defense claim, which usually goes to whether or not you reasonably believed that you had to use deadly force in order to prevent the infliction of death or grievous bodily harm onto yourself or another. That's usually basically how you have to meet it. Under Wisconsin law, it appears that there is an exception to that, where if you are bringing about those, if you contributed to bringing about those circumstances by committing an unlawful act, which itself would cause other people to do the potentially dangerous or harmful thing to you, then you also have to prove that there was absolutely no other option available to you than to use deadly force, right?
But does that come down to, like, in the heat of the moment, I imagine people, like, you can't really make the argument that someone's going to have the time to, I'm going to now ascertain whether or not you pose a threat to my immediate, like, body, you know? Like, it's kind of like, oh shit, he's about to attack me, shoot, you know?
Right. No, and that's why this is why the importance of sort of like the reasonableness standard comes into play, right? And again, this is the reason why I'm very clear that this is where the legal argument probably vastly is different from the moral argument, or at least to an extent, right? Because in the legal argument, it just looks at not whether or not he knew whether or not the other people had a deadly weapon or were going to kill him. It doesn't really, like, the law doesn't really care about whether or not he knew for sure what was going to happen to him, but rather like what a reasonable person acting in sort of the heat of the moment, like what you said, would think that based on what they observed, that they either were going to get killed or were going to suffer grievous bodily injury. And that's where, when you look at the footage, it's hard to tell, right? And it will likely be, and again, this is the answer that people don't like hearing, but it probably will be determined at trial, right? This is so there's a couple kinds of like legal fiction, and one of them, like one kind of legal fiction that we just kind of have to concede is true, or else the entire like legal court system falls apart, is the idea that if you put 12 or 13 jury members who are supposed to be representative of like the average person in society in a jury, and you have them, like, if you give them all of the facts, that what they decide is a fact based on what they are presented with is just assumed to be true, right? Or it's supposed to be true. So if a jury were to find that Kyle Rittenhouse had a reasonable belief that he needed to use deadly force in order to prevent the grievous bodily injury or death of himself or another person, and that he had exhausted absolutely every other available alternative, then they might very well acquit him, right? And then it would be very, and then it'll be very, very hard to get that reversed, because this goes back to like different standards of review, right? Like if you appeal to an upper court, generally speaking, to abridge it, issues of law, like how a court may apply law to particular facts, those are usually the things that are given the most review. That's called like de novo review, where a court basically reviews it as if the first case didn't happen at all, right? Because judges and lawyers, or at least appellate judges, are supposed to know the law better than trial court judges. Again, whether or not you believe that, that's what the law assumes, right?
Yeah, we have the same system in Canada.
Yeah. But comparatively, let's see. I looked this up before I came on here a little bit earlier.
Oh, you did research?
Just a little bit, just because I figured that this would come up. But comparatively, when we're talking about issues of fact, and this would probably be an issue of fact, then the standard of review would be clearly erroneous, right? Which is basically that, like, an appellate court is not going to overturn what a lower court finds as fact unless it's like clearly erroneous. Like, unless like, let's say, for example, that Kyle showed up there, and literally all the protesters were having a happy campfire, just like sitting around and literally singing Kumbaya, and he just started like mowing into them. And then the lower court found that he was acting in self-defense. There, you might actually have a claim that, like, okay, the trial court was clearly high on something.
Yeah.
There's no way that
court.
this could actually. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. There you go. But no. So like in this instance, if a trial court were to find that he had that he met all the requirements for using self-defense, that he specifically that he had a reasonable impression that he needed to use deadly force, and that he had absolutely no other alternative, then for the large part, we're probably stuck with it, right?
Can I quickly ask you, and this gets a little bit, I know we're avoiding doing the moralistic argument, but I'm sorry, I'll have to pick your brain on that as we get closer to the
You're
second
all good.
half. Okay. The idea of someone, maybe this is like kind of far removed from me, but the idea of someone defending property, and I know it's only like a 12 or 13-minute drive or whatever from where he was. So, you know, the idea of the state line, a lot of people are like, well, that's very blurry because it's very close to where he is. But the idea of protecting the property under the penalty of death or murdering other human beings for stuff that you don't actually own, because that in your video is something weird to learn, that there's laws for that, protecting the third person's property. But again, it's a third person property whose property you don't even know, right? Like, it was pretty far removed. Like, I don't know if you've already seen the hilarious arguments being made by the other lawyer from the other direction, who they're saying now.
I mean, like, I may have heard, I've heard some arguments. Like, I've seen the video footage.
No, the official statement from the lawyer.
Oh,
his lawyers put out a
please
statement.
tell me.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
It's amazing. Oh, God, it's great. Okay, so Kyle was a good old boy who, with his friends, after a day of whatever they were doing, were washing graffiti in their local area. Not in Kenosha. They were washing it over in their hometown. And then they received a phone call, a beacon, if you will, from the owner of a gas station asking if someone could come help them protect their property. So they were like, okay.
Pause you for a second.
Yeah.
This is, like, is this an actual statement than actual lawyer?
But yes, 100%. Oh, I'll send it to you right now. This is the official statement from their lawyer, by the way. Yeah, I know. That's why I was like, is this anyone taking this seriously? Yeah, I know.
All right.
Yeah, no, I'll link it. It's amazing. So anyways, him and his buddy get in the car. They drive across state line where their gun is waiting for them. So you see, the firearm was not transported over state lines. It was actually waiting for them in Minneapolis. So they picked it up there, and then they went about their way and went on their quest. So
I mean, unless there's some weird wonky Wisconsin state law, like, he was not allowed to, like, the law is pretty clear, right? Unlawful use of a firearm, right? Mm-hmm. Like, if he used it and had it, and which he pretty clearly did in Wisconsin, and he was under the age of 18, that's a class that's it. Like, again, you can disclaimer, I'm a law student, ask an attorney, all that, yada yada. But, like, a plain reading of the law seems to indicate that he was not acting lawfully, right? At least in that regard. And that actually becomes very important for a lot of the other analysis, because, for example, when we talk about the law on protection of property of a third person, right? Like, there is law for that, right? Like, we talked about it on my stream previously, but it's very like, there's a couple interesting qualifications here, right? So first, you do have to act like there's a lawful requirement, right? So, like, the fact that he had a gun and was acting unlawfully probably would itself disqualify him from being able to claim that sort of an affirmative defense. But also, like, he was pretty far away from the premise after, like, when he shot, some of the people, right? Especially the ones on the street. So I'm very much at a loss, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. Correct me if I'm wrong, but where exactly was the property that he was protecting when all the events went down? Because, I mean, like, for the second one, it seems like he was clearly far away because he was on the street, right? He was far away.
I think they're about 4 blocks apart. And sorry, I made a mistake. I said Minneapolis. I meant to say Kenosha. Okay. So I got his lawyer's release statement. Thanks, Nine Tails. I'll put this in your chat. Hold on one sec. Is that the easiest way to send you something? Can I just put it in your YouTube chat?
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's see.
I don't know if it will. Oh, you made me a mod. Nice.
Yeah, totally.
By the power of Grayskull. All
right, let's take a look at this.
Yeah, let me just get to the point that's the funniest part, though.
Okay, Kyle Rittenhouse.
Okay, yeah, so at the very start, right? Later in that day, they received information about a call for help from a local business owner. Like, who the fuck is a local business owner phoning high school kids across state lines? That makes no sense to me, but sure, awesome. Like, the slay.
Yeah.
Whose downtown Kenosha auto dealership was largely destroyed by mob violence. The business owner needed help to protect what he thought was his life's work, including 2 nearby mechanic shops. That's the correlation between the two. Kyle and a friend armed themselves with rifles due to deadly violence gripping Kenosha and many other cities, and they were headed to the business premises. The weapons were in Wisconsin, so they never crossed state lines. I mean, there's no more details given in this official release statement so far.
Okay. I mean, again, unless I'm missing something, I don't really see how that necessarily applies here. Now it really depends on where the police mechanics. Here, hold on. Let me just go ahead and let me pull up the law real quick, just so that we're not completely speculating.
She's grabbing the law, everybody. She's about to open the law, you see.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like, I already did a lot of the research. So, we might as well not be, just flying blind here.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's see. So, God, this was like a 28 page. I feel like such a boomer. I fucking use PowerPoints for my presentations. What the fuck am I?
You sound like a law student.
All right. Yeah, no, I mean no, that's true. All right, defense of property. Okay, let's see. So defense of property and protection against retail theft, right? So a person is privileged to defend a third person's property from real or apparent unlawful interference by another under the same conditions and by the same means as those under and by which the person is privileged to defend his or her own property from real or apparent unlawful interference, provided that the person reasonably believes that the facts are such as would give the third person the privilege to defend his or her own property, that his or her own intervention is necessary for the protection of the third person's property, and that the third person whose property the person protecting is a member of his or her immediate family or household, or person whose property the legal person has a legal duty to protect, or is a merchant, or the actor is a merchant's employee or agent. That's probably what they'll try to get under.
Mm-hmm.
An official or an adult or agent of a library. All right, that doesn't really apply here. And the section unlawful means either tortious or expressly prohibited by criminal law or both. So here, like the real big question, and the thing that I think that kind of sinks this argument, is going to be the question of whether or not specifically that his or her intervention is necessary for the protection of the third person's property. Like, that's going to be a stretch, right? Because I mean, like, just by looking at the footage, we can see how far removed Kyle ends up becoming by the time he ends up shooting the two people at the end. And even because I don't know if the initial parking lot is going to be claimed to be one of those protected premises based on what you showed me. But even if they did, like, based on the police footage, I think it's going to be hard to really make that sell that he had, like, it was necessary, right? It's not just like it was reasonable. Necessary is such a higher bar, right? That it was absolutely necessary to take the other person's life, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's going to be a really, really hard sell, just based on like a plain, just based on a plain reading.
So when they present evidence and everything, will they have to prove, like, will he get the owner of the shop on the phone? Will they give a testimony? Will he have to be like, well, I called those boys, those high school kids, and I asked them to come protect my shop. I knew they were, militia members, or is the idea, could it be that they called the militia itself? Because that would make, at least that to me has some plausibility, right? Because I know he was part of, or at least an ancillary member to some militia group or something of that nature.
So this goes to, like, again, like, how courts determine what a fact is, which is, again, like, to some degree legal fiction, because what will probably happen is either, like, first they'll probably take this person's official statement in the form of not a stipulation, an affidavit, right? So they'll do a deposition where, they'll sit down with that witness. Both parties' lawyers will ask them questions, or have an opportunity to ask them sort of like preliminary questions to figure out, like, exactly what their story is. The side representing Kyle Rittenhouse will obviously ask questions that will push the narrative that they want, and hopefully the prosecuting attorney whoever the prosecuting attorneys are will ask questions which go to undermine the person's credibility. Because in order to, like, you can't just, like, call someone a liar outright in the court, like, when you're cross-examining someone, right? But, like, cross-examination is usually the way that like the stories or what is being introduced as alleged fact to a jury by a witness is discredited. And in this case, what the prosecutor would have to do would be to either prove through cross-examining them that some part of their testimony is false, or they would have to impeach them, which is basically to catch them in a lie.
Mm-hmm.
It's where you ask them a question during cross in trial, and they say something that's contradictory to something they had said at any point prior in any other instance. And then you say, Your Honor, I would like to approach with this piece of evidence, showing them saying something else from this prior instance. And the judge would give you permission. You'd go up and you'd give the jury a copy. You'd make a whole big deal about it. And then you wouldn't say that they're a liar, but you'd basically say, so let's be clear, you just said X, right? And they would say yes. And then you'd be like, okay, can you read along silently from this as I read aloud? And then you read aloud the thing that directly contradicts the thing that they had just said. And you say, did I read that right? They say yes. And you say, so you said this completely different thing on this prior occasion. And they're like, yeah, I guess I'm a dumbass. And then you sit down because everyone in the room realizes that person's either an idiot or a liar.
And,
right?
And do you get a +1 as a lawyer at that very moment? Do you feel it?
Yes, yes, you do. You level up.
Nice.
You become yeah, you become a better lawyer.
Well,
Yeah,
my
but
other question would be then, if for whatever, let's just, this might be spurious, but say they were making this up, and say the owner of the shop hadn't called two high school boys across the state line, or just hadn't called anyone at all, and they were trying to pass that off as the story, would they then, like, would a person, if I wasn't involved in this, or I didn't want to be involved in this, would I risk, like, I assume that's endangering a child to say, hey, you underage kids, can you come with guns to protect my gas station?
I mean, again, I don't know the specifics of Wisconsin law, so here I'll talk morally, but yeah, probably.
Yeah.
If you're asking kids to come with a gun, to come with guns, to come and do something unlawful for you.
Mhm.
Actually, hold on, wait. Now that I'm just thinking about this off the top of my head, I'm sorry. I don't know. There could be another claim of like solicitation, right, where you're soliciting other people to commit a crime, since you're asking specifically people who are underage to come and commit a Class A misdemeanor, right? Like it's possible. But I would have
Well,
to
I mean, the
I would
argument
have
I think putting forth is that he didn't ask them to commit a crime. He just said, "Can you come help protect my store?" Not can you come?
right. And
yeah.
yeah, so I mean, like, I guess that if you were to take it that way, then it would kind of put the onus back onto Kyle or
Mhm.
whoever it was that provided him with that firearm. Because if the store owner just said, "Hey, come protect my property," that doesn't mean that Kyle had to come and bring a firearm. That meant he could have just shown up in his own person without a firearm.
Someone's asking if it's an open Facebook post or event. So if someone posted on Facebook, which could be what it turns out to be, please come help me. Would that be solicitation?
Hold on, let me look at my outline for criminal law.
Oh, she's referring to the law again, everybody.
Just out of
I appreciate
curiosity.
all this, by the way.
Yeah, no problem.
Especially you being fastidious in this regard.
Yeah. So I'm just all right. So basically, again, I'm just gonna read. So basically, this goes to the idea of a complicity crime, right? And I'm just gonna read you again. I'm not going to interpret it for you because this is something which I'm not familiar with. But basically, like the common law elements of complicity are one, an act of support, aid, assistance, or encouragement, which may include counseling or commanding. That's the action, right?
Mhm.
And two, the crime of another, right? Now, how does the crime of another element factor into complicity crimes as a prosecutor's burden? Well, prosecutors charging complicity must prove beyond a reasonable doubt that, in fact, the principal, the person who committed the crime that is being alleged that the other person was complicit in, the principal in the first degree committed the target offense, and secondly, that the crime of another is not a result element. This goes to like the really fine elements of criminal law analysis. But prosecutors need not prove any actual causal connection between the accomplice's support or encouragement and the crime perpetrated by the principal in the first degree. Nevertheless, some jurisdictions require a nexus of some kind. But all that word soup is basically to say that, like, there is, I mean, based on just like the academic literature, like some possibility that, like, if someone provided aid or encouragement to another person to commit a crime, that, it's possible they could face liability. I don't know whether or not they will charge. Like whether or not I think it's Wisconsin DA would charge based on that. But I mean, like based on the common law, it's possible. It depends a lot on what is the specific Wisconsin law or like what the specific interpretation of common law is in Wisconsin.
Mhm.
Like I discussed, just for people who are watching, like I discussed a little bit how there's a distinction between common law and like incorporated state law. Common law is basically like if you were to take a survey of the broad consensus of law in the entirety of the nation, what does it generally look like? But then, like, if you go from state to state, like the specific statutes that they have, some of them will have nuanced differences, right? Like the common law standard for murder is the unlawful killing of another with malice aforethought, right? Very simple, very clean. Well, I mean, malice aforethought is a term of art that can be a little wishy-washy, but like once you actually like start wrangling with it, it becomes a lot less
So
scary.
then it basically moves over to case laws, which you have to refer to at that point, right?
Either case law or statute. It depends
Okay.
on what's prevailing. Like usually you start with a statute. By and large, that's usually like what you will end up starting with when you're looking at, especially a criminal law. And then there will be cases which interpret it, usually from like the highest court in the state, either like a state Supreme Court or sometimes, if it's a really big deal, then like the Supreme Court, right?
Mm-hmm.
So let's see.
Like
for example, go
ahead. Oh, I was just gonna say, while you're looking that up, I also wanted to ask: Is there an element of perhaps would the mother be in trouble in any of this, seeing as he's a minor?
I had not looked as much into it, so I don't want to say too much.
Mhm.
Again, like I want to make very clear to people that like I'm right now I'm just acting in the capacity where I'm representing people as for purely educational purposes, things that I have already learned in the course of my education and the work I've already done. So I don't want to do too much like research into areas that I don't, that I can't really claim that sort of a qualification for.
Oh yeah, awesome.
Right. Yeah. Like
more and more streamers should adopt that philosophy as a whole. I would say, like, just to be like, yeah, it's I have no shame in saying I don't know, like, and I don't feel comfortable telling you as an authority on the subject about whether or not I don't know that. That's great.
Right. I mean, I also have like another consideration because like I'm going to be taking the bar in a couple of years, and I have no idea how this YouTube thing will make that go over. I've done research and I've seen how other people have done similar things, so I think I should be fine. But I'm essentially just being extra precautious because I don't want to make myself out to be an expert in any way on anything that I have not learned about, right? And even to the things that I have learned about, I want to give like a lot of disclaimers so that people are aware of exactly what I'm able to convey. Um, so yeah, I mean, like, but yeah, no, I do agree with that. It would probably be a much healthier world if people didn't try to have an opinion on every single little thing, even if they don't really know that much about it at the onset, right?
Mhm.
Like, oh God, I remember Vosh's whole black nationalism arc, right? Like, literally, I feel like
or the indigenous one.
yeah, or the indigenous one. Like literally the entirety of those things, like those issues could have just been avoided completely if he just said, I don't know, I'll have to learn more about it. And
Mhm.
boom, that's literally it. The entirety of that would have just been settled, right? So yeah, I do both as as a legal logistical matter and also just as a prudential matter try to only talk about things which I feel a decent degree of certainty on that I can communicate effectively.
And hey, I do want to
Yeah.
also I do want to give him credit as well. He was quite good in both situations, especially when it came to the black nationalism one, where I was like, just talk to Andre offline. I'm sure like you'll realize he doesn't mean it in the same way you think he does. And then with the indigenous one, he went back, he learned a ton, and then he came back. He was like, okay, here's the way I should see it. And I was like, oh, that was really base take. It was a really good. Really, like, I wish more streamers, and I say this as someone who apologizes constantly. Maybe it's because I'm a Canadian, or because I always like take videos down or tweets down, or like I think people should be okay with being like, I was wrong, and here's why I was wrong, and like are we all just imperfect? Are we all the Pope? Like, are we all just going to come forward and like like you're doing a way better job of most because you're like, well, actually, everyone, I want to be kind of reserved in the way I'm going to discuss this, and just base it on what I already know. I was like, okay, well, yeah, that sounds very reasonable. I don't know.
No, and I get that. I will say that like it is hard, right? Like even like I acknowledge that at some level, when like there, this is something that I'm experiencing a lot more nowadays. But obviously, everyone gets like hateful comments, right? And everyone gets comments, especially like political commentators, like, "What the fuck are you talking about? You're completely fucking wrong in your analysis. You're completely fucking
Yep.
full of yourself, piece of shit, asshole." Something to that extent, right? And some that does hurt because like I do genuinely like try to take criticisms, sincerely and reconsider if I said something that's wrong. But at the same time, in order to do that, you kind of I don't know. That's something that I struggle with because at some degree, like I either want to phase out people. Like on one hand, I want to block or phase out people who are just acting in bad faith, who just really don't care about whether I'm right or wrong, just want to hurt me.
Mm-hmm.
Because like there are plenty of
Oh,
people on
the
that.
internet, you mean?
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, literally the entirety of the internet, except
Yeah.
for the good people.
Yeah.
The good people
Exactly.
are good, but the vast majority, yeah.
But the good ones are here right now. Otherwise, like in both our chats.
Yeah, I
Otherwise,
know, right?
the internet's a cruel and strange place.
It's true. That's actually, yeah. Nothing
Oh,
truer has ever been said.
okay, Riley. Then how about this? How about I take your lawyer hat off for a wee bit, and we put on your moralist hat, your philosophy hat. Because
Okay.
that way it can be outside of the purview of the classes and everything, right?
Yeah. No, that's
Okay.
totally fine.
Then my question to you would be you said in your video that you do not think that he was morally justified in the killings of those people. Can you give like a Cole's notes to everyone as to the reason why?
Yeah. So essentially, like, there is some relation to the legal argument in that, like, I do think that the fact that he was acting for the entirety of the time that he was there in an all unlawful manner, at least in that regard, shows a degree of, I suppose, what you would call it, conscious assumption of the risk. Where it does, like, I don't want to necessarily derive my morality from the law. I mean, as a larger policy, like, I think that this would have been a very interesting and different question if he had been 18.
Mhm.
But the fact that he was underage, I think, at least for me, changes the analysis because it shows that, like, especially if he was, and I'm inclined to believe that he was aware of that law, especially since he was a former police cadet. And he had tried to join the police force, right? I would expect that he would have at least some degree of competency in that regard. And given that fact, right, that it seems very likely he would have consciously disregarded the law, even where the law is essentially like it's similar in some ways to like a seatbelt law, right? Like on a policy matter, it's a law which exists to try and minimize harm to other people. And so when you consciously disregard a law which is aimed at minimalizing harm to other people, then it seems like to me that morally you sort of assume the risk of causing that type of harm to be incurred onto other people, which is a complicated way of saying, like, if he, like, since it seems very likely that he consciously disregarded the law, that he sort of assumed the risk that he could have possibly used that weapon that he had illegally in a dangerous manner, and namely could have either caused grievous bodily injury to someone or killed them, right? Does that make sense? I'm
It
trying
makes
to
total
like
sense. For me, it was kind of like it was cut and dry in the sense that like I don't think you're innocent if you're traveling to an area that you know to be one in conflict with a weapon that you're going to brandish for the purpose of defending a stranger's property. Like, I think my problem with a lot of these things is people try to apply blanket statements to them, as in like this is what should be moral and just in all scenarios. And I was like, it seems very specific to me because like if you want to say like, okay, maybe he would have been more justified if that was his parents' store, and maybe he would have been even more justified if people were attacking the actual store itself. Maybe he would have been even more justified if they were attacking his mother who was in the store, right? Like each one of those, I'm like, yes, you're justifying this more and more. But in this case, it seems so extreme in the opposite direction. It seems like we've gone so far beyond the pale where it's like you're traveling to other areas to protect them for strangers in what you see as, I'll be honest, an ideological battle, right? This seems to be that there was some element of going to join what he sees to be. It doesn't need to be a race war. I don't need to pull the like he's like a white nationalist or anything, but definitely like the idea of I as a cop have to protect order and law and property, like the property from anarchy kind of idea.
Yeah. No, and I see that argument, right? I suppose that where I would come down on that is that I'm not sure if that's something that we would want to maintain in every circumstance, right? Like, let's say that we change the hypothetical around to where, you have a home of a couple like black people, and there's a mob of KKK people coming at that person's house with guns and torches and whatnot. They're looking to lynch them.
Sure.
I'm not sure if if people are necessarily morally in the wrong
Mm-hmm.
for gathering up their own weapons and whatnot and going to that house and defending and helping to defend that house and the people against the other parties, right? Now,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like, you could draw a distinction probably between those two instances, but I think that basically captures the idea that, like, I don't think that we should necessarily prohibit other people from being able to help those who they may otherwise associate with, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's basically like
Is that represented under the law? Is there something for like if you take the race card out of it, like a community policing, like can I defend my community versus another community?
well, I mean, like, there is, the law that we talked about earlier. Like, there's a defense of the third person's property, and that's probably the closest thing that you're going to find, right?
But in
Where
that case, don't you still need to at least know that person, or it can just be anyone? Can I go to a stranger's house and defend it for?
Okay.
Yeah.
So are we shifting a little way? Because, like, the way that I'm approaching this circumstance is under the assumption that Kyle was in fact recruited to go over, and that was the reason he was there. I think that that's a different circumstance from where someone just kind of shows up and is like getting ready to shoot. I don't know, like there certainly are a lot of instances recently where you have like basically I don't know what you want to call them. They'll call themselves militia. Other people will call them like, I don't know, what's like the worst term that people could call like, you've seen pictures of them online, people who show up to these protests with like
Oh, you
fully
talking about the
armed
Proud
rifles.
Boys, the Three Percenters,
Yeah, the
any of the
Proud
white
Boys.
nationalist
Yeah,
organizations, ethno-nationalist organizations, right-wingers, fascists,
exactly.
Nazis? Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
All of that, right?
Hmm.
There are plenty of them who show up at other events, and I think that again, in the moral sense, like they're probably just going to want to, for looking for opportunities to shoot black people, right? Like that's probably the pretty easy moral argument there, right? If they're going to a protest, which is specifically aimed at the advancement of the rights of people of color, and there's sort of this pretense that there might maybe be a possibility of violence or rioting breaking out,
Hmm.
then and that's what sort of invites them to go and defend a third person's property, even though they don't know that third person, they have no relationship with that third person, they otherwise don't ever associate with that third person. I think that there's probably a pretty decent inductive line of reasoning that would lead someone to conclude that, yeah, they probably are just looking to shoot some black people.
Hmm.
I don't think
But
that
you would you
I don't
wouldn't.
think that's unreasonable.
But did you make that leap in any of this? Because I know a lot of the other discussion was about whether or not he could be plausibly seen as having any kind of ideological. I don't even want to know how to word this.
Like ideological bias or
Yeah, absolutely. Because I mean, okay, First off, the Blue Lives Matter movement to me is a little further right than the All Lives Matter movement. All Lives Matter is a right wing response to Black Lives Matter, and it's just their way of basically making it about them once again. And then Blue Lives Matter takes that one step further. And then if you actually check out the Blue Lives Matter official website and some of the creeds, it is quite there is an element of racism to it. Okay, it pulls it a little bit further, but it's not necessarily like going to be as black and white as being like we're here to police the N-words or something like that, right? It is more about upholding society's values and stuff of that nature. So I don't necessarily say Blue Lives Matter means he is now a white nationalist, right? To me, it looks more to be like he is a MAGA Trump supporter, which does, again, like there's a lot of overlap here between MAGA Trump supporters and what I would consider right-wing or far-right ideology. I don't know. Is any of that a leap to make in your mind, in your non-legal opinion?
Definitely, yeah, my non-legal, yeah. Just to make life easier, until we say otherwise, we'll keep everything in the moral framework. So unless we say explicitly, just everyone watching can assume that we're just talking morally, right? So here, right, I think that definitely like contributes. Like it's not an irrelevant fact, right? Like the fact that he is very openly in support of Blue Lives Matter, the fact that he was a former police cadet, which also kind of it's also something which may explain the fact that he was so familiar with a lot of the police officers, the fact that one of them gave him a bottle of water, the fact that when he was literally, after he had already shot the other people and walking towards the police, that they didn't even stop him, even though he had a firearm, even though other people were saying that he was a murderer and that he shot people.
I know.
Yeah.
It's just like
there's
and he was talking to the police beforehand. They were all like buddy, and he's like, okay, well, yeah, you can patrol this area, you can patrol that area. Like, what the hell? I mean,
oh yeah, no, there's definitely there. I don't think that's irrelevant for consideration, right? That I think that definitely demonstrates, at least to some degree, like some familiarity or alignment with police officers in these efforts, right? So I don't think that that's necessarily immaterial. When we're considering here, like, so I guess that the question is like, does that factor into whether or not he was justified in being there, since that may have been like some part of his motivation, right? It's certainly possible. This is one of those circumstances where there's like a lot of different factors, because like on one hand, if he was legitimately called there to be a medic, which is something I know that he's claiming, right, or that he's claimed in videos. If he was called there to defend someone's property, which is a consistent story, that's that's what he said in the video recordings, and that's what seems to be maintained. Like that, like I
think he genuinely believes that, to be honest. I think like I'm saying, it doesn't necessarily have to be as black and white as him pointing towards black people and calling them the N-word. I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that he might be trying to uphold some ideological framework that could encompass, racist ideology, could pour over into the MAGA fascism as well.
Yeah. And I tend to agree with that, right? It's and all right, I don't know, this is a small tangent, but it relates to this, right? Because before I came because right now I'm living in Maryland, I'm living in Baltimore, hooray. Which is actually, I won't talk too much about that, but it's certainly better than where I was before, because for the longest time, for the past 5 years, I lived in the South, in either for the vast majority of the time in Memphis, Tennessee, and then a little bit in Arkansas, then a little bit in Florida. small time in Ohio before I came out here and started my legal education. And a lot of the people in the South, and people might push back against this, but it's a complicated discussion because a lot of the people, especially people who I knew, because for the longest time, and this is a little bit of Riley lore, back when I was presenting as a cishet, straight, all that guy, I actually dated a woman from a Southern Baptist community, right? And that was a very interesting experience for me because obviously, like coming from the North, I had a very negative perception of a lot of people from down there. But it was interesting because on one hand, a lot of them did have the beliefs that, people would stereotypically make them out to be, right? We got into a lot of arguments about like LGBT rights. Like everyone knew that I was very openly pro LGBT, very left leaning, all that, right? But at the same time, they were also some of the nicest people that I had known. Now that their treatment of me has substantively changed since I have come out. There's a reason that one of many reasons I'm no longer in the South, right? Being trans down there is not a great play. If you want to have like
all that sounds like
it's
a really intense lived experience.
Yeah, no, it was a thing. But I've talked about it enough that anyway. So the thing about it, right, is that a lot of these people, especially like with the way that they think about these sort of issues, like it's not as if they're coming into the situation thinking, oh yeah, I just want to murder these black people, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's sort of like when you follow the line of logic down to its conclusion, they genuinely do think that police uphold like the norms and order in society, right? But then like they also, in order to maintain that view, have to justify reasons why they disproportionately kill black people and people of color, right? And so it's not so much that they start with the position that black people deserve to be shot, but usually they start with the position that the police do no wrong. And so when they kill black people, well, it's not the police's fault. So
yes, it's the black people.
Yeah, exactly.
It's 1350 basically. They commit all the crimes.
Yeah, no, it is 1350, and that's actually like a really good synopsis of like how a lot of these people think, right? Because it's a way of arguing, listen, I don't hate black people. They just caused this themselves. The police are just doing their job. The police can't do any wrong. But it's the fact that they start with the premise that the police can do no wrong, right? And so I don't think that he necessarily went into there with the impression that like, listen, I'm just going to go in and kill some black people. But he did go in with the impression, and I think it's pretty easy to see, right, that the police could do no wrong, and especially given his close association with them, right? The fact that he knew them, the fact that he was a former police cadet, the fact that they gave him water, right? The fact that they fucking let him go after he murdered several people. Again, I know that no legal conclusion
and cross
there,
state lines so he could turn himself in his own police station. I was like,
yep.
It's gonna be the most privileged thing ever. Right away, he was like, I shot some people, like, get on through, we gotta go arrest those black people. What, the dead ones? Like, okay. Alright, well.
But like the moral argument aside, even, just for a second, I do think that this is probably one of the most pivotal sort of instances, especially like in terms of like the Black Lives Matter movement. Just in terms of like the police reception of both him and Jacob Blake, right? On one hand, you have someone who, after being tased, calmly gets up, walks around his car, reaches in for an indeterminate reason, and that's cause for police officers to unload into his back 7 times with a handgun. And then comparatively, you have someone who actually killed several people and who police just let go on by and ended up going back to his home state, right? You have a very apparent distinction in how people are treated, and there is a pretty clear distinction that a big fact, like it is pretty apparent when you just look at it that a large factor for that is race,
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. I don't know where I was taking that. But I suppose that so when we're thinking about like Kyle's mentality, like taking it back into the earlier conversation, right? Was he going expecting a fight? I mean, probably, but not necessarily in the way that I think a lot of people are thinking about it. He probably thought about it more in the way that like, I don't know, like a lot of, one example I actually remember, one way of framing I heard that I thought really fit Like, it's probably the kid who plays like too much Call of Duty and gets like gets enamored with like that aesthetic of like going and dying for your country, and if there's one way to die righteously, it's to die defending the people that you care about, right? And so he probably didn't go in with the mentality of oh, I'm just going to murder some black people. But he probably did go in with the mentality of, if I'm going to die, it might as well be here defending my country against the tyrannical uppity, so and so. You can finish the rest of the sentence. He probably didn't think that far, but if he would have followed it to its logical conclusion, then, that's probably where he would have ended up. That's why a lot of these people, that's why I feel like for a lot of people from these sort of demographics, it's very easy to get radicalized further to the right. Because usually the thing that keeps them from doing that is just like following their premises to their logical conclusion. Like most people don't consciously think about, well, why do the police disproportionately kill a large number of black people, right? Like most people just, yeah, exactly. But like even then, like most people who support the police just don't really think about it too much. It's one of those things where it's just kind of like, it's probably just a fact of life, right? That a lot of people think about and then just kind of brush off, because most people are just going about living their day-to-day lives. But then when someone actually begins like applying some pressure to that, you basically have one of two conclusions to come to. You can either come to the conclusion that the police are doing something wrong, or the black people are doing something wrong. And if you're already taken as a given that the black people can, or that the police can do no wrong, well, you're kind of left with one option.
To our God, I'm Ra. We pray at your altar of awesomeness. To our monarch, Thomas Bone, you are the light that guides our path. To our lords, Jeffrey Lamb, Stephen, Ninetails Cosmic Fox, Hans Josephine, and Poppy Nelson, we bow meekly for your pleasure. To our knights of the round table, Josh Mickelson, Dylan Bite, Alexander Thaler, Zach Christensen, Todd Buckingham, Todd Lajeunesse, Clement Chutzkoff, Godbear Games, Moss Beast, Political Puppy, Ali Menthol, Jimmy Big Nuts, Alan R., Andreas Chitoro, Good Poon Hates Cops, That's Solid Poon Man, and Bryn, we salute you. And to our many merchants and farmers, you have our undying love